So we're going to talk today. We're going to throw some praise out there for indie authors that we like, and I think we probably each have our own list. Do one of you want to start, or how do you want to proceed?
I've been thinking about this, and before I, name any names, I've been trying to figure out, okay, why do I like the authors I like, not indie or any other kind? Because I don't think it's always a book of excellence that I like. I mean, but these things are so subjective, so it's really hard to tell. But I mean, I know I have over the years liked a lot of books and enjoyed them and read them repeatedly that have faults. If you go looking for them, you find faults. But I think it's a combination of an interesting plot, not necessarily a really dramatic plot, an interesting plot, and at least some characters that are likable or at least tolerable, like not people that I either don't care anything about or actually dislike in a sort of the kind of way you dislike somebody that's not even interestingly dislikable. They're just
right.
awful. So but what turns me off, I guess, are characters that are too flat.
Yeah.
So and what I really like sometimes are books where you're not quite sure, like it's all interesting, the characters are likable, and you're just, when you get to the end of the book, you kind of think, did I really understand some sort of issue about it, to the point where you want to go through that whole trip again and maybe get some more insights. Like that to me adds up to a really good book. But getting to particulars, now we know some of these.
Start with your first one.
Pardon?
Start with your first one.
Yes, yeah. My first one would be Lorenda J Taylor, who wrote the Man Who Found Birds Among the Stars, which is a fictional biography of a future astronaut, I guess, or a starfarer, or she doesn't call them astronauts. And also another series about intelligent termites living on another planet, which has almost no human characters at all, although there are a few. And there's a link, and her books all kind of relate to each other, just about. And so I guess because I must find her writing style appealing, and the situations she creates with the characters have that engaging kind of richness to them. Because to be fair, some of the middle volumes of the Man Who Found Birds Among the Stars books are kind of slow. I mean, they're about a man who ends up in seriously in trouble, basically, with the authorities, and has to work out a lot of heavy things with himself before he can move forward. And that process is kind of drawn out, but there are enough sort of entertaining and humorous things along the way that it doesn't get too tedious. But I have a high tolerance. If I'm invested in a character and a book, I don't really mind slowness. But that's just me. Right. Like I say, that's subjective.
The author's name was Lorenda Taylor?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. She lives in Colorado, I believe.
And it looked like somebody you're familiar with, we're told?
Yes, I've read 3 of those books so far, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
And Birds Among the Stars.
The Man
Who Found Birds Among the Stars.
Say that. So what is it again?
The Man Who Found Birds Among the Stars. The main character has an interest in bird watching.
Okay.
Just the way, because it's set on Earth, right? So it's Earth. But anyway.
I've never heard of her. I've never heard of that book. So.
Well, she's totally indie. Like she's about as indie as you can get.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Extremely good sci-fi. Great world building. I love those books.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe one of you guys could carry on a bit.
Okay, I will start with one, and this is somebody that Bertold is familiar with, who started as an indie author right around the same time I did, and she lives in New Zealand, and she indie published about 4 or 5 books, and then she got a traditional publishing contract, and she's now published her 3rd book on that contract, and the last book, she just published the 3rd one. The book just before that, called Photos of You, she actually has now sold the movie rights. So Her name is Tammy Robinson, and the first book she published was called Charlie and Pearl. And one of the things I did for this is I went back to Amazon and found the reviews that I posted for some of these books. So this is the review for Charlie and Pearl back in 2013. I picked this up after finding the author's blog. It was kind of a lark, but there was something about the description that struck me. Glad I took a chance. This is an incredible story. As long as you don't mind getting kicked in the gut, shedding a few tears, and having your heart squeezed at the pain the characters go through, you'll love this book. It's simple yet elegant, painful yet heartwarming. It is, put simply, an incredible story told well. And what Tammy does, all of her books are basically, they're romances, they're love stories, but they're not, hunky guy and cheerleader girl or whatever. They're love stories told around a crisis, typically a health crisis. And she also rarely ends them with everybody living happily ever after. So you don't get the expected ending in her books like you get in most kind of romance love story types of things. And I've read every one of her books. There's a couple that are a little bit not quite as good as the others, but I look forward to every book she publishes to see what she's doing next. So that's my first one. And Bertold, you like Charlie and Pearl too, right?
Yes, that's a great book, and you recommended it to me, and yes, yeah. It's excellent. Okay, so now I have one that I know you're familiar with, Mark. Noah Goetz.
Yes.
He writes in a variety of genres. Probably my favorite book of his is The Unpublishables, which I have a copy of it here. I enjoy this book. It's a comedy, although it has serious notes to it, but I enjoy it most because it's about indie publishing. And it's about a man he doesn't want to write a novel, but everybody else in the world is.
Yes.
And so due to various circumstances, he has to then try to write a novel. And throughout all this, he's meeting other people who are also writing books. And it's a fun look at the whole process of writing. It's well done. And I think anybody who's familiar with the world of indie writing relates to it. So that's probably my favorite book of Noah's, although I've enjoyed all of them. He's done murder mysteries and comedies and science fiction stories. And I really enjoy his writing.
Yeah, he didn't make it on my list because I knew you were going to probably have him on your list. But when you were talking, Audrey, about trying to figure out, why do you like certain books? One of the things that I thought of when coming up with my list is, and Tammy doesn't necessarily fit this profile, but writers who do different things. Noah Goetz is a good example. Each of his books is different than the last one. And that's one of the things I like about a lot of indie writers is they don't just stick with a particular genre, and at least the ones that I enjoy, plenty of indie writers do, but it's just nice to see a variety of different kinds of stories coming from the same person. Mm-hmm. And I think Noah Goetz is a good example of
that. Okay. Speaking of doing things differently, another science fiction writer who's also indie is A.C. Flory from Australia. She's written some really, the book called, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. That's the thing about reading, you read silently and you're not sure if you're saying things, but it's called Voktah, Voktah. And it's set on some planet somewhere, totally fictitious. And there are no human characters. The creatures there are totally inhuman and really interesting. but it's a very harsh world with a very harsh population of two different kinds of creatures that can fly, but flying is hard work for them. One variety of this creature is bigger than the other, and they're kind of in charge, and the others sort of serve them, but there's a lot of intrigue and very little kindness or anything sympathetic. The climate is harsh. There are two suns. It's hot or really cold, and it's just a total. It's one of those things where you can experience something quite unpleasant, from the safety of wherever you read, and because it's inhuman, I guess it's always a surprise when you can relate to these beings, even though they're pretty unrelatable to, if you think about them without really getting engaged. And I know she does intense research on, like she doesn't just kind of throw an alien world together out of nothing and kind of wing it. She really makes sure she's got the two suns thing just right as to how long it would take, how long they'd be both visible, and one sets and the other rises, and the different technologies that the creatures use. Like she does research on just how would that work, sort of from projecting from an Earth-based reality into this alien world. And so, I have a lot of respect for just how she writes and also for the results. Now, she also has another sort of a trilogy, I guess, to do with technology of keeping people alive. Bodies have failed, and so their brains are kept in a special facility and hooked up to things where they can experience life, but in a totally artificial way. And I know Andrea Flory is a gamer. Like she does a lot of gaming. I don't know what, I'm not into that at all, so I can't comment on it. But that comes out in that series. And I have to say, I cannot for the life of me remember the title of that.
Interscape.
Pardon?
Interscape.
That's it. Interscape.
another author Bertold knows about.
Yes. Yeah. We've both read.
I've seen her name in a lot of places. I'm not sure where, maybe commenting on your blog and things like that. And
yeah,
I see that name frequently in the indie author world, but I've never read her, so I will check that out.
Well, it's quite realistic science fiction, and I think I don't know, if you're not really into inhuman worlds, you might want to start with the Interscape books, because they're more relatable to. I mean, it's set on Earth in a couple of centuries from now, and those books really make you think.
Okay.
My next one is going to be a guy by the name of Vince Dickinson, who has published Fugue in C minor, Wrapped, spelled W-R-A-P-T, Virtual Silence, and I can't read my handwriting. I don't know what the fourth book is. But going back to 2013 again, this was the review I wrote on Amazon for Fugue in C minor, and I was kind of amazed when I saw this because I never post reviews this long on Amazon. Vince is another self-published author I met through my own such efforts as well as through our blogs. I downloaded this book a while back and started reading it this week. It was an interesting experience. What can you say about a book that when you first start reading it, each time you pick it up to read, you wonder if you should skip to the next book in the queue, but you decide to stick with it, and by the time you're done for that reading session, you've gone much further than you thought you would. That was how I felt for the first third of the book. Something changed with the second half of the story. I found myself searching for time to read Fugue yesterday, shirking my own writing and any other reading options in one of those wonderful mad rushes to the end. I easily read more than half of the book in that mad rush. There are some things that don't work. There's something about Maxim's wife he doesn't trust. In the end, the explanation seemed too rushed and too easy. There's also something about the dialogue and the characters that frequently seem just a bit off. Some of that could be explained by Maxim's amnesia and the corresponding struggle he and those around him experience as he struggles with his lack of memory. But I don't think it explains all of what seemed off. Those troubles aside, that I got into the mad rush to finish Fugue in C minor says what you need to know. It's a good read and another example of the types of literature, the types of stories, the type of quality that self-publishing is making available to the reading masses. So Vince is I think an example. I don't think his 4 books, they're all different. Some of them are kind of like murder thrillers. Some of them are, you know, like the Fugue in C minor, which is about something completely different than a murder mystery. So that was my second one.
I have not heard of him. I will have to look him up.
He's, like I said, he's published 4. That was his first one, 2013, and he's published 3 more in the years since then.
My next one is a book called Hyperlink from Hell by Lindy Moon. This is the Lindy Moon, Moone. This, I thought about whether to talk about this book. It is the most bizarre, just, it's, I probably am a bad person to talk about it because I don't know how to describe it, because it's, it's just one of the strangest and most unique books you'll ever read. It's framed as a comedy, and there are parts of it that are very funny, but it's sort of, not to give too much away, it's sort of an unreliable narrator situation, and the actual story is quite dark, but you don't realize that at first. Like, as you're reading it, at first you're like, oh, okay, this is kind of funny, and then you start to understand what's going on. It's a book that I love it. I think it's brilliant, but I could understand some people hating it. But at the same time, it's a perfect example of what we always talk about with indie authors, of somebody trying something new that you don't see. And for that, I think it deserves attention. And as far as I know, that's the only book by that author.
Lindy
I
Moon.
read a review of that on your blog.
The great thing about this is we all get to add books to our to be read stack.
True enough. Okay, I guess my next author would be Bill Fitts. That's Bill and Fitts. He's a fellow from, I think he used to live in Tuscaloosa, but he and his wife moved to Florida some years ago. And he's retired, and he has written a series of murder mysteries, sort of, I guess you'd call them cozy mysteries. And they very much follow that, well, I guess you could say formula for a cozy mystery. You have this fellow who's just retired from being an IT guy at a university. And I think some of this is based on Mr. Fitz's own life. But anyway, let's, going on. His character, whose name escapes me right now, but anyway, is this retired IT guy. And he's a widower, and he has a dog and a cat, and things sort of come up. You know how these mystery series people always end up having to solve a murder or two. So there are quite a few murders on this campus. And it really kind of has the whole, I think, Southern campus life thing, with football and stuff. And the fellow is into cooking. So you get a lot of quite nice, I don't know if you like reading about food. I sort of do. Like, it's a nice way to experience food without having to cook anything or do dishes, and it's not fattening. And so you can have these vicarious meals. And he talks with his cat and dog, and they kind of give him insights, and when he's solving these mysteries. And it's just a very kind of nice, but it's sort of different in a way. I mean, it's not, I don't know, I guess because the character is older, and there, romance, there is kind of a little romance thing running through it, but it's not a big thing. And they're just very nice mysteries. He's written about 4 or 5 of them. And he also has, I think, a 3-volume sort of YA fantasy series that's quite different. And those are okay too, but I'm mostly talking about these mysteries right now. And they're usually, it's the Needed Killing series. The first one's called He Needed Killing.
He Needed Killing.
Yeah, That's the first volume. And then there's a bunch of other people that needed killing. And the author is Bill Fitz. So I could recommend those for, like a light, fun kind of read.
Okay. My next one is a woman from Australia, and she has published under several different names. And there was a time when I actually knew what her real name was, but I don't anymore. So she currently has what she has available under the name Fallacious Rose. And what got me interested in her stuff is the book that is no longer available. It was called A Warm Wind, and I read it when I was writing Weed Therapy, my published and then unpublished book. And without getting too much into detail, Weed Therapy is the man's perspective of a family dynamic that wasn't working. A Warm Wind was the woman's perspective of almost the exact same thing. And she did an excellent job. Unfortunately, when I looked it up, it doesn't look like it's available anymore, but the next book she wrote is the book that I'll focus on here. It's called Deeper, and this was back in 2013 again. It's interesting, going back into my Kindle, 2013 is clearly the year that I discovered indie authors. But Deeper is about mermaids, and this is my review. Add me to the list of other reviewers who haven't read mermaid stories before. This is a new experience for me, and it's why I like reading self-published authors like Ms. Thompson. Thompson is the name that she has published under before. They're writing different stories that traditional publishers don't seem interested in. Here you have a mermaid who's a bit rebellious, a bit different, a bit more curious than the rest of the mer. But you also have mer that probably aren't quite like you'd expect if your experience with mermaids is limited to Disney productions. It was a fun read from the first page to the last, well written, with a story that pulls you in and keeps you turning the pages. She has published a lot more stuff since then, and some of it works, some of it doesn't, to be honest. But that's one of the reasons why I like her, to be honest. You have no idea what you're going to get every time she publishes something, and she has done a lot to help other writers. She comes up with ideas for anthologies and invites indie writers to submit stories for it. I have one story in one of those, and she's done a number of collections like that. And then she has her own novels and short stories that she publishes as well under the name Fallacious Rose. And like I said, I like the variety. And I never thought I'd read a story about mermaids.
My next one is one I think you will know also, Mark, Philip Mccollum.
Yes.
He's written, like, I first encountered him when he wrote 52 short stories in 52 weeks, which he would post them, every week on his blog, and then he would post a little thing about his process for how he wrote them. I love the short stories. Every week he kind of gravitates towards sci-fi and that sort of thing, but he would seek out different genres. He would try all kinds of new things. He's also written a novel, The Almost Apocalypse of Apple Valley, which is it's pretty good. It's kind of a Stephen King sort of Lovecraft.
Stranger Things.
Yeah, Stranger Things, that sort of thing. It's a 80s nostalgia mixed with monsters and creepy stuff going on, and it's a pretty fun book too.
Yeah.
I get to claim that I was a beta reader for that book. And the 52 short stories in 52 weeks, I have that, but I have to be in the right frame of mind to read short stories. There's something about short stories that, I want a novel. I want something that, goes on for 80 or 100 or 150,000 words and just sucks me in, and short stories don't do that. So I haven't been able to get very far in his collection, but I should go back and find it and do that.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sort of like that too about short stories. I know they're supposed to be kind of they're kind of like string quartets as opposed to symphonies, right? And they're supposed to be kind of a more pure form of writing or something where, you know, the author has to strip things down to the minimum and engage the reader quickly, and, you know, kind of go through all the story elements, but really efficiently. But I, like you, I prefer something more meaty. Like, if I'm going to be engaged and invested in and following the arc and all that stuff, I'd rather it went on for a bit longer than say 10,000 words at most, and frequently a lot less. Although really short fiction is sort of good for, I don't know, if you don't have time or whatever. Like if you're looking for something to read on the bus or at moments when you are kind of in between things, then flash fiction or really short fiction would be good that way. But that's more, you know, kind of think of that more as a filler or a snack rather than a meal. So yeah. Right. So where are we? Is it my turn again?
You're next.
Okay. I think who I'll mention next is someone who I haven't read a lot of, but she strikes me as being a sort of model to follow in terms of indie authors. This would be Diana Wallace Peach. And I think she writes what is intended to be YA fantasy, but I think she has a lot of older, you know, like adult type people like us, not people who aren't teenagers. And she's written a number of series, and I believe she used to be traditionally published, but broke away from that and is now totally indie, and she does it really well. I mean, her covers are gorgeous. The stories are, I read her blog, so I know about her writing process is very serious, and she's a really industrious author and does things, you know, aiming for perfection. And although like I say, I haven't read a lot of her books because I'm of mixed minds about fantasy, just as a reader, you know, there's nothing wrong with it, but I don't know, I guess I read Lord of the Rings, and to me, that's the fantasy, and now I'm, you know, anyone else's kind of comes up against that. So while I like science fiction and speculative, I'm kind of not as drawn into fantasy as well. But I thought I would mention Diana because she seems to be, I think she's a very successful indie author and just seems to do that thing really well. She has a blog and, you know, has a lot of followers. And I've read, I have to say, only one of her books, and it was really well written, you know, but again, being a fantasy, I somehow just wasn't totally invested in that genre. So that's, yeah. But anyway, so that's just a little aside.
My next one probably won't be a surprise. Kevin Brennan.
Yeah.
And he actually, his first book was traditionally published, and it's called Parts Unknown. And while not as long, it kind of has this kind of, when I say Western, I don't mean a cowboy story, but an epic Western type feel to it, like Wallace Stegner, if you've ever read Wallace Stegner. And it amazes me that that book didn't get more something, and that after that he went the indie route. But, you know, since then he's published Occasional Soulmates, Fascination, Town Father, Yesterday Road. I think there might be another. I know that, Yesterday Began Tomorrow, or Eternity, the last one, Eternity Begins Tomorrow, or something like that. And again, I'm not going to read any reviews that I've posted about these books, but they're all just different. But he also, I think every one of his stories, especially the ones that he's written and indie published, they are journey books. Not necessarily a road trip, but they are a trip from somewhere to somewhere else in different ways. And my favorite of his books is Town Father. I don't know if either of you have read that, but it's basically, it's about a town that a bunch of women form in the foothills of California in the 19th century. And they're going to live there by themselves and not be bothered by any men until they realize that the only way they can keep the town going is if they have a town father. So they put an ad in Eastern newspapers, and some guy answers the ad thinking it was like a, real town. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly what he thought it was, but he clearly didn't realize that basically the point was that they wanted him to come help them continue the population of their town. And then it, goes on from there. But I just thought it was a really entertaining book. And I think that's the thing with a lot of his stuff is none of it is really super heavy, but it just, he tells a good story.
That's true. Yes. Yeah, I did read that one, and also Fascination and Yesterday Road as well. And Eternity Begins or Began Tomorrow, that one as well. Yeah, and you're right. They are all different. And they're definitely books that leave you, first of all, when you're reading them, you want to keep reading, right? They're just sort of, and very different from one another. And they leave you with something to think about, just about life or possible futures or, that sort of thing. So, I'm trying to think of which one I like best.
His next novel is a baseball.
Probably was Eternity Began Tomorrow. That's just got more dimension to it than the others, but they're all very sort of human relations kind of stories.
Yep.
I've only read Fascination and Eternity Began Tomorrow, and I like them both a lot. I guess if I had to pick between the two, I'd say I like Fascination a little more. I don't know why. I did. But they're both really good, and I'm going to have to read more books of his.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think Parts Unknown is available anywhere. And I don't know how I got a copy of it, because the copy I have is signed by him, and I've never met him. I don't know how I got it. And it's a hard copy, hardback, and it's on my bookshelf, and I don't know how it happened.
Interesting.
That's cool. Okay, so my next one, this is someone I've only read one book by. Jeremy L. Jones wrote a science fiction book called Saturnias Mons. And it's, if you like classic sci-fi, I think it's just great. Reading it, the vibe I was getting, it reminded me of Dune, actually. And it's part one of a series. I haven't read the second book yet, but I'm looking forward to it. It's just, it's about these explorers on this moon. They're encountering a lost civilization, and there's backstabbing and a big corporation, like a big interstellar mega corporation causing trouble. It's, it's sort of an adventure book, but it also there's sort of four main characters on the team, each of which is distinct, and the ways they interact are interesting. It's a really good story. It might be a little more, I don't know. It's definitely a genre book. It's sci-fi, so it'll be maybe more appealing to people who love sci-fi in particular. But it's still really just a good world and a good story.
Okay, so I just have a couple more that I've mentioned. I just looked through my Goodreads, the books I've reviewed, and picked out the ones that recent books with 5 stars, plus some of the others that I had already read before. But 2 relatively recent ones are Chuck Litka, who publishes as C. Litka, and Michael Graham, who publishes as Michael Graham. Now, C. Litka writes sort of adventure stories, I think you would call them. They're not really fantasies, and that there isn't like a lot of magic or anything, but they are set in fictional worlds or fictional countries that are sort of relatable to. I mean, they're just close enough to being kind of real that you can envision them, imagine things right away without him having to describe everything. And they're about people who are faced with a situation and have to work it out. And there's a little bit of romance. And I think I'm speaking of, is it Beneath the Lanterns? You read that one too, didn't you, Berthold? I think so.
I did
And-
not actually read that one yet.
I did.
Okay.
I did just read that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, okay. And the other two, I come to think of it, are sort of science fiction. Summer and Amber, and what's the other one? I really should have written down more stuff. But those are sort of about kind of, they're sort of scientific, but not really. Someday Days, that's the other one. Yeah, they're about scientists who are young and upcoming and trying to make their life, their career, but they also they meet people or have to deal with people who are difficult and developing romances that complicate things. But it's not, romance isn't really the point. It's just sort of an element. And it's just sort of interesting just to follow these stories, which aren't terrifically dramatic, but that's what I mean by engaging characters that you want to spend time with. And I'd say that's how I would describe Litka's books. And Michael Graham, his books are he's from Britain, I believe. Come to think about it, I follow his blog, and he has a lot in there about walking up hills and photography. And in fact, photography appears and watches and other things make appearances in the one book of his that I've read, which was called, hell, I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, his books are quite philosophical and psychological and have a lot of symbolism. And so I found the one I read a little off-putting at first because it was quite complex. But once I got into it, it sort of, kind of like breaking in a pair of shoes, right? You might get these shoes, you think they look sort of okay, you put them on, they kind of pinch here and there, but once you walk around in them a bit, they start to fit. So that's what I think Michael Graham's books are probably described that way, is that you might have to kind of take in these symbolic and philosophical elements, but the basic thing, there's a quite hefty dose of romance in his books, but it's again not formula romance in any sense, but just kind of how romances can, or having that objective can sort of influence somebody's life. And so anyway, I'm doing a terrible job of promoting it, and if he ever sees this, my apologies, Michael, but anyway, I do recommend, based on the one book of his that I have read, which was called The Inn at the Edge of Light. That's it. I think I'd remember a compelling title like that. But yeah, I would recommend his books for people who like thoughtful, sort of meaty writing.
You have anything else, Bertold? We have less than a minute.
No, nothing I could cover in that amount of time, probably.
Okay, I'm going to say really quick, Carrie Rubin, because she's now indie published a book and is going to indie publish another book. I used to always include her in my list of favorite indie authors on my blog, and she'd always comment, I'm not an indie author, I have a contract. And now she's an indie author because she's indie published a couple books. So Carrie, you can't say you're not an indie author.
And she's just generally awesome, so include her anyway.
Yes, totally.
Right.